So for those of you who may not know us, my name is Dawn Germain, and the lovely gentleman over there at the reception table is Charles Basque. So what we're going to do tonight is just give you some results of the community engagement that we've been working on over the last few months. So Charles has a particularly interesting presentation for you regarding the land use. And then I am going to go over some of the housing policy community engagement updates that I have. So the presentations don't take long. It's going to be about 20 minutes or so. And then we have a lovely, lovely buffet dinner for you from La Source. So when the time comes, we will have a prayer for our feast by one of our community elders, and then we'll all enjoy a nice meal. We also have DJ Floyd from FN Sounds to provide us with some entertainment for tonight. So tonight is meant to be a really social evening and some good information for you. It's Charles and my way of saying thank you for all the energy that you guys have been putting into this community engagement over the last couple of months. And on your way in, you would have received some surveys. So at any point in the night, if you complete both surveys and come see me, I'll be sitting at this desk, you'll have the opportunity to get a $25 gift card. So to start, I'm just going to let Charles continue with his PowerPoint presentation. And then I'll come back on the mic and we'll talk a little bit about the housing policy update. So, Charles, the mic is yours.
So hello everyone, my name is Charles Basque. I'm the Land Use Planning Coordinator for the development of the Listugujewei Land Use Plan. This is the Listugujewei Land Use Plan Community Engagement Results Presentation. So the focus is going to be on land use management, planning, protection, and objectives. So throughout my presentation, I will be highlighting and repeating a few key words that describe the purpose and roles for the development of the Listugujewei Land Use Plan. I call these my super words. So S is for sustainability. It's about creating balance that is long-lasting. U is for unity. It is agreement and togetherness. P is for planning, for the future, forward thinking. E is for engagement, which is communication and commitment. And R is for responsibility, to be ethical and eco-friendly. So the purpose of our land use plan is to create a working tool that can guide the administration, chief and council, and the community in the development of a sustainable future. It is meant to be a guide created out of the community's values and visions. A well-developed land use plan relies heavily on communication, unity, and balance. It must balance the interests of the individual with the wider interests of the whole community. Community engagement is key to the development of our land use plan, and it is essential that the community members be involved in the identification of issues and concerns, as well as the review of the options and solutions. Okay. So land is valuable and scarce. It is a finite resource that has to be managed correctly, or it will not sustain our people for future generations. Abuse of the land will mean fewer resources and fewer options. So the overall goal for our land use plan is to establish sustainability. It is our responsibility both as the Listuguj government and the community to abide by these guidelines and rules to effectively and ethically develop a sustainable future for our children. So the next portion of this presentation is going to focus on the data that I collected. I've categorized all the data into groups. So first I'm going to talk about the community engagement events, land use management, land use planning, land access, and CP issues. CP means Certificate of Possession, environmental protection, and community objectives. So at the beginning of this year, I started the community engagement portion of the development of the Listugujewei Land Use Plan. There were 27 community engagement events that we have, including tonight's event. Initially, we planned for 30, but there were some last-minute cancellations. So out of the 27 community engagement events, 3 are information sessions, 3 are community engagement activities, 3 are community workshops, 7 are targeted workshops, 2 are student workshops, and 9 are department and internal workshops. So this is the final event, number 27. The total participation to date, excluding tonight's event, is 460 participants. And out of those 460 participants, I've reached 310 individual participants during the 26 community engagement events. So out of the 27 community engagement events, 23 of those events consist of workshops and engagement activities. The focus of those events were to determine the types of land use activities that are going on in Listuguj, to identify any land use issues or concerns, and to identify community goals and objectives. So before I continue on the results portion of this presentation, I would like to note that most of the community members already govern themselves by the unspoken rules that are rooted from our inherent traditional values. So the intention of our land use plan is to transcribe those unspoken rules into recommendations that can be developed into policies, rules, regulations, and bylaws that can help keep our community on the path of sustainability. So this portion of the presentation is the meat of the presentation, I guess you can say. But before I continue, I'd like to tell you how I scored the types of information that I collected. If a topic, issue, or concern was discussed in a community engagement event, I've recorded it. And the numbers you see up here are the amount of times those particular topics were discussed per workshop or activity. So, for example, the need for logging regulations within the community was brought up in 9 different workshops. So that rating gets a 9 out of 23, which is a 39% discussion rate. In every session, the need for some type of land use management was determined. So it can be concluded that the majority of the community members would consider the development of some form of land use management. During the community engagement events, the development of industrial zoning regulations was discussed 7 out of 23 sessions. And 5 out of 23 sessions, the community members indicated that industrial zones should be located away from residential areas. In 13% of the workshops, the community also pointed out that there is a need for establishing environmental regulations for industrial use. In 26% of the workshops, the community expressed the interest of establishing setbacks, particularly when it concerns public safety, privacy, the development of infrastructure, and environmental protection. So in 21 out of the 23 workshops that I had, the community expressed the need to develop land use planning. In 52% of the workshops, it was shown that there was a need to identify the areas for appropriate residential and commercial zones. It was also identified in 6 workshops that they would prefer certain commercial activities to be more centralized and easily accessible. In 10 out of 23 workshops, the community had expressed the interest of designating commercial areas for future tourism development. Most of the areas that were suggested were busties and up the woods. In 10 out of 23 workshops, there was an issue identified with mixed land uses, and this this was with the residential and commercial land uses in Listuguj. It was suggested that certain commercial activities shouldn't be mixed with the residential areas for public safety concerns. In 9 out of 23 workshops, the community stressed the importance of identifying traditional areas that are in need of protection. An example would be burial grounds, traditional gathering and foraging areas. Those are just 2 examples. In 9 out of 23 workshops, the community identified the need for designating suitable recreation areas that enhance public safety and health and have appropriate parking. So in 16 out of 23 workshops, the community identified issues concerning land access and certificate of possession issues. In 48% of the workshops, it was suggested that Chief and Council should focus on acquiring more lands through ATRs, which is addition to reserves. In 7 out of 23 workshops, the community identified the need to develop a plan that settles the right-of-way issues in Listuguj, particularly when it comes to landlock issues and cost efficiency during infrastructure development. In 6 out of 23 workshops, community members were for the development of residential areas up the woods when and if land access is an issue. Land access for residential development becomes an issue. In 3 out of 23 workshops, a topic of expropriation was discussed. And in those workshops, the majority of the participants agreed that the implementation of expropriation is necessary for the overall collective interest of the community and public safety. It is important to note that the community expressed the need for the development of proper expropriation procedures, and that expropriation should be the last resort and should include fair compensation for CP holders. In 2 out of 23 workshops, the community expressed the need for the development of a conflict resolution process for land use, land loss, and land ownership issues. In 2 out of 23 workshops, the community expressed the need for the development of a land survey assistance program to assist in cost of the surveying of CP lots. So in 100% of the workshops, the community identified the need for the development of environmental protection. Specifically, the protection of our water. So in 97 or 91% of the workshops, the community identified the need for environmental protection zones and regulations for our water. In 35% of the workshops, the community specifically identified the need for the protection of our water source and the identification and protection of a secondary potential water source if there is ever a need to develop a secondary or backup water pumping station. In 30% of the workshops, the community identified the need for the development of an environmental management plan and an improved waste management plan. In 5 out of 23 workshops, the community thought it was important to protect the sugar maple stands up the woods for private or commercial maple syrup production. In 17% of the workshops, the participants stressed the importance of environmental education for our youth and the general public. Did you know that in the past couple of years they found salmon smolts, so small salmon in Sibuk? The more you know. So these are just this is just a small list of the top recommendations for community objectives. In 57% of the workshops, it was discussed to increase the natural resource security. So an example would be to expand the Rangers program to include the patrol of the woods. The development of an enforcement mechanism was also discussed. examples could include fines, community service, sweat equity, and the restriction of land use activities. In 39% of the workshops, it was the community members stressed the importance of a forest replanting initiative. In 39% of the workshops, the community also stressed the importance of promoting traditional land use knowledge and activities. A large portion of community members thought it was a great idea to designate an area up the woods to develop a shooting range. In 7 out of 23 workshops, the issue of soil erosion along the waterfront was brought up, and that a plan should be developed. In 26% of the workshops, the community members thought it was a great idea to promote agricultural activity to promote food security. So I can't list all the objectives that we're including, all the objectives are in recommendations that I've collected during my community engagement outreach program. But here are a few honorable mentions. The identification of the identification of areas for walking, biking, and ATV trails, a healing / detox center, the identification of an industrial area for storing heavy machinery and equipment and boats. It was also stressed that we should develop an outdoor recreational center for land-based learning. Also, building using the sustainable technologies in our building practices, and increasing commercial operations off reserve. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned. Okay.
So this isn't, public speaking isn't always Charles's favorite thing, so he was really excited to be able to do this results presentation, and I'm not going to drag him through any more engagements, not until the fall anyway. So just before we enjoy our dinner, I think everyone received this page. It's just an update regarding the housing policy. So a lot of your faces are familiar, and if you came to one of Charles's session, that means you probably came to one of the housing ones as well. So this is just an update. The final results won't come in until after the survey closes on June 29th, but this is just to give you guys an update on what's going on, because we do have a newly elected chief and council. So housing is going to be probably one of the first decisions that they're going to have to look to make in the next coming months. So for those of you who don't know, in mid-2017, the LMG hired a gentleman by the name of Brian DeConti. He's a Anishinaabe from Kitigan-Zibi, and he is a specialist in housing policies. So he specializes in writing housing policies and creating housing programs for First Nations communities. He's First Nations himself, and he only works for First Nations communities. So the Chief and Council and the Capital and Infrastructure Department realized that it could be beneficial for Listuguj to have a housing policy, so they contracted him and his expertise. Together, in the working group, they formed 3 different objectives and 6 different target areas that they were looking to achieve with the housing policy, right? So when Brian approached me and wanted me to conduct some outreach work for him, we also set up some objectives for ourselves. So the first one is I really wanted to identify if community members believed that Listuguj needed a positive change in housing, and if they believed in the idea of a policy development. The second thing I wanted to identify was if they supported the idea of reducing political oversight. So basically that means having our politicians act as legislators and our administrators act as administrators, And it's important to note that the biggest change there would then mean that politicians no longer have the ability to select recipients for either houses or repairs. Okay, so that's the biggest thing with political oversight. The other thing I wanted to do was kind of identify what steps the housing program could take to increase member trust and support in the program. So over the last, I've also had 27 engagement events. So over the last couple months, we've been talking to a lot of people, we've been listening to a lot of people, and trying to get a sense on those three objectives. So to date, we've, not including all of you wonderful people, but we've had a total of 332 individual members. And that's really important because some of you ask why we have you sign in for each meeting, and that's a tool we use to make sure that, you know, if you've come to 5 meetings, that's great, and we love that you're passionate about it, but we don't want to count you 5 times. We only want to count you 1 time as a person. So we have, when I say we had 332 individual members, that means each person was only counted once. We had some public meetings, we had some targeted workshops where we talked to lease-to-own owners, people on the wait list, Section 95, carpenters, a lot of different demographics, elders, women, students, and we also were invited into many offices to speak with staff about this issue. So we really appreciate how employers took the time to let us come in during their workday. So basically, the real interesting part of the information is coming down on the bottom of that first page. And out of the 332 participants, overwhelmingly there is support. There is support for the development of a housing policy, a positive change in the housing department, which would allow for increasing transparency and fairness, which would allow for decreasing political oversight, and which would allow for increasing independence for our members. They also had 100% support. So far I haven't talked to anybody that's told me that these target areas aren't a good idea. They've all said that they are a good idea, and they would be housing programs, repairs programs, organizational charts, quality construction assurance, which is probably the biggest one, tenancy rules, and transfer rules. So if you just want to take a minute while you're enjoying your dinner, or if you want to review it when you go home tonight, on the back page, this is all the information, the most talked about topics in all of my 27 sessions. These are the things that came up consistently. Almost every single group talked about these issues. So increasing fairness, and the number one thing there was, let's not have our politicians involved in the selection. That was overwhelmingly the number one thing that I heard people say to me. They also wanted to make sure that clients were filtered into the appropriate programs. And they were also in favor of using a criteria-based system, preferably one that would even allow you to be anonymous. So for example, if I applied, I would get an application number instead of having to use my name. They also wanted to figure out a way to get more access to land for members, because not all members own a CP, so it makes it really hard for them to want to build on their own. And then of course, they believe that all members should receive some sort of assistance, but it doesn't always have to be equal. So really taking a look at providing assistance based on what the need is. Increased quality construction. So number one, which I heard every single session, was verified building codes for inspections for all projects, okay? They appreciate the fact that LMG has been doing progress in house inspections, but they really want to see verified building code inspections for all projects. Enforcing the drug and alcohol policies and procedures to ensure construction quality and work safety. Provide additional training to our workers to ensure proper qualifications and work experience, and they're expecting that to be done in-house, okay? They want to be able to provide that sort of training locally. Develop building standards and professional standards that align with national standards to ensure that each client receives the same treatment and quality of service. Consider energy saving and sustainable building practices and materials, and they want to reevaluate what types of homes and buildings we're building in Listuguj, right? So maybe taking into consideration some of the recent events in the community, we need to take a look at the way we're building and make some adjustments there. They also talked a lot about increasing accountability and transparency. So that means better follow-up with clients regarding applications and wait times. Increased communications. One of the things that I found out during this engagement is that people are not readily aware of the different types of programs available to them or the details of those programs. So there needs to be some better communication there. The other thing is that they want to hold decision makers accountable for their actions, and then better reporting on budgets, project timelines, and materials control. That was always one of the major issues. And same goes for being able to access what your balance is on your account and getting annual statements for your payments. Now, the most interesting thing that I heard when I was out with the community is this last part on how we can increase trust and support for the housing program. So members said to me directly, they want to see the housing program make an attempt to make it right, which means provide assistance to clients who may have some home deficiencies due to poor construction to begin with, right? So when their home was originally built, perhaps it wasn't built up to code and now they're facing some problems. They want to see some sort of retro action for that, some way to help repair. The other thing is that actions speak louder than words. So they really need to see the improvements and see your efforts to believe it. Talking about it is not enough. They want to actually see you start to put some things in place. So that's both the politicians and the administrators. The other thing is that they believe the housing policy is a good idea, but they are fearful that it may not be adopted. And the number one reason that they are fearful is because they are afraid that Chief and Council won't want to kind of release that control that they've had over the selection process. So this is just a bit of an update. Like I said, we have the survey, which you all filled out tonight. Thank you very much. It's available online until June 29. So if you have family and friends who aren't here, we're hoping to post it by next Wednesday. So if you have family and friends who aren't here, please encourage them to log on and fill it out because, like I said, this is going to be one of the first decisions that our new Chief and Council will have to make, and it will really help them if they have a good idea on how community members feel about the housing policy. So like I've said, everyone that I've talked to is in overwhelming support, but the more information we have, the better.